Estes e outros conteúdos estão disponíveis em www.beiratv.pt.
Daniel has asked me for a title for the presentation, so last week I had to make something up very, very quickly, and I'm not entirely sure if actually the title reflects what the talk is going to be about. And this is also why I have the Yahoo picture up on that first slide, because I couldn't think of a title, for the presentation. But the Yahoo picture has a reason. You're all aware that about 3 weeks ago there was this video going out on Twitter, where Melissa, whatever her name is, CEO of Yahoo, where she wrote and said, we need to roll up our sleeves, and I went with my designers and we spent the weekend and we designed a logo, and this came out. And I'm not going to talk about the logo, because other people have already done that much more elaborately than I can. But what I'm going to say about the logo is that it creates emotion. Type creates emotion, very strong emotions. People got so upset about this whole process of the logo and what the logo looks like, that they very ferociously commented on Twitter and all the social media. So that makes me think that type actually has quite a strong power, probably even more than we care to think about. But also, if you look at this logo, it's kind of like Optima, so it's very much based on the old Roman letter forms, etc. And we, of course, have Roman letter forms out here. And that brings me to the next thing: type as a tool of branding. And if you start thinking back a couple thousand years ago, you realize that the Romans were probably the first people who applied branding. And wherever the Roman army went, they took their typography with them. They installed their typography, and you knew you were part of that Roman Empire. You were under Roman protection, and you had to abide by Roman laws. That's it, branding, completely. And if you look at around 120 AD, during the time of Emperor Trajan, the entire Roman Empire was the size from the Atlantic all the way over to Persia, from Hadrian's Wall, which is the Scottish border, all the way down to almost Central Africa. It was huge. And of course, you simply cannot keep an empire together just by military force. So what they did is they invaded the country, they left a few, small army there, they installed their government, and they installed their branding. And through branding, they were able to maintain a Roman Empire. Power of type. And that the type was successful is obviously proven in the fact that now, 2,000 years later, we're still using the same letter forms and the same design principles. So they did a good job in the first place. Before I speak about Christopher Plantin, I just want to quickly do a detour to Gutenberg. Now, Gutenberg's work wasn't necessarily the most beautiful work that, you could look at. But what he did was create massive social change in Europe. Let's be clear about one thing. Without Gutenberg, a Renaissance could not have happened, because Gutenberg facilitated the industrialization of printing. The moment Gutenberg started printing, the power of the Roman Catholic Church was broken. The power of the aristocracy was broken, and Reformation happened. That was only possible because of industrialized printing. Yeah. So, speaking of Catholics and Protestants, here comes Christopher Plantin. He was a printer, publisher, all sorts of stuff, based in Antwerp around the mid-1500s. When he started off his business, he started it off under Catholic rule. So the Protestants come in, nearly destroyed his business, nearly killed him. He changed his business model, started printing Protestant stuff, and then the Catholics came back, nearly destroyed his business, nearly killed him, so he had to change his business model again, until the Protestants came back and did the same thing again. But again, it shows you the power of type, the power of publishing, the power of the printed word. Let's not forget that. Again, it comes down to branding, it comes down to emotions. Why would a government government be so keen in destroying a print house if obviously the printing wasn't considered dangerous? So it's a strong emotional link. A few weeks ago I was in Antwerp, in Brussels and in Antwerp, and I went to the Plantin Moretus Museum, which is obviously, if you ever happen to be around there, it's worth a trip. I spent 2.5 hours there and realized it wasn't enough. You can easily spend a whole day in that place. It's beautiful. And it's sort of like, kind of like brought up some old emotions as well, obviously having been a typesetter myself, hand type, you know, kind of you look at it, oh yeah, I used to do that, you know, that was cool. But I was also looking at some of the type samples, and already at the time, you know, there was obviously various type available. You had Roman type, you had black letter stuff, you know, the odd script here and there. Obviously not in the variety as we do today, because production facilities today are so much easier. Back then, it was a major effort to create a typeface. So variety was smaller, but there was a variety. Then you also get all these people, particularly the older generation, who believe that the computer is rubbish and that the old guys always knew better how to do stuff anyway. And I would like to kind of like draw your attention to the spacing of the word Romanum. Now, that is a piece of shit. That is bad. You know, this, if someone spaces like that at my office, they get the sack. They can pack up straight away. This is not how you space letters. So the quality wasn't always good just because it's old. Don't forget that. I actually personally believe that printing quality, type quality today is far superior than what we've ever had throughout humankind. Maybe with the exception of the Trajan column. That's maybe an exception, but I don't think it's going to take much longer to even overtake that. Now, emotions. London last year had obviously the Olympics, and you probably all remember still the London Olympics logo. And again, a horrible piece of work. And I have been very vocal about that as well. It's a horrible piece of work, the London Olympics logo. The idea is nice. I like the idea and like the concept of it, but the execution is so poor. And the typeface that goes with it is really poor as well. Again, the idea is nice, but the execution is really awful. So again, it's a really, really emotional thing. So Rio Olympic Committee approaches us and said, can you guys design a typeface that follows the logo? And so the challenge was on. We had to obviously produce something better, since I was mouthing off so much. Challenge. Now, the logo as you see it, that was already established. That had been designed by a Brazilian designer. I can't remember the name now, but the design agency involved was Tachil, both in Rio and São Paulo. And so we were working like with various parties in developing the typeface. And to start off, the whole challenge was to create a font that would follow the rhythm and the look and feel of the logo. So we went away and started drawing on the screen about 25 or so variations. You know, obviously on a limited character set, just going through and through. I'm just kind of flicking quickly through so you can see what's been happening here. And throughout the whole process, we realized we could never 100% capture that look and feel of the logo. It just wasn't possible by drawing on the screen directly to get the movement of the logo, get that movement of the writing, the movement of the hand. So after about 3 weeks of work, we threw all the work away and started again. So Fabio and Fernando, both in Brazil, they went back and did some basic calligraphy exercises. They realized they could not just go straight on the screen trying to imitate the writing of the logo, but they would actually have to do it. They actually would have to write it. They would have to experience the hand to understand how the letter forms are formed, how they flow, how they are constructed. So they went through a whole series of writing exercises, if you want, until they sort of like figured, okay, we've captured it. We know what the logo should look like now. And this is sort of the result. And you can see how it flows. If we go into some of the details, some of the letter shapes are open to reflect what happens in the R of the Rio. We're also looking at the stress of the forms, and obviously it's a broad brush or broad nib pen, so you get that stress in the diagonals, in the curves, and that's offset against the verticals in some of the vertical letters. And through that juxtaposition of stress in a diagonal and in a vertical, you get that rhythm, that harmony of shape that kind of like reflects the handwriting, that kind of like simulates handwriting. We were looking at individual forms, how can we bring the 16, that ligature 16, into the letter forms? So again, lots of variations on that theme. Big thing was legibility. Obviously, the Rio typeface is going to be used in signage, it's going to be used in day-to-day communication, everywhere for people from all over the world. So legibility, absolutely paramount. Now, if you look at a lot of joining script typefaces, when you have a situation like up here in Mundo, M-U-N becomes very, very difficult to distinguish. Particularly, say, imagine if you are in a wayfinding environment and you're walking past quickly, it's difficult to read, you can't make out the letters. So we realized we had to create a whole set of alternative characters where sometimes you break the script, the joints, in order to improve the legibility. That, unfortunately, resulted into a font of about 5,000 glyphs. So every single character has an alternative layer behind it. Every accent has a layer behind it. There's hundreds of ligatures in there with hundreds of alternatives. So you get an extrapolation of variations in the font, which then normally a Latin font would have about 350 characters. All of a sudden you end up with 5,000 characters, which have to be programmed in OpenType so that when the user types it in Illustrator or in InDesign, the correct combination comes up automatically without the user having to interfere manually and set the correct glyph. Took the programmer or the engineer about a week to program the font, and then probably another 2 days of testing to make sure it functions properly. Here's just some examples on how this works. Particularly, for example, if you do the Baisha, the first combination, how the I, the terminal of the I goes into the X, it creates quite an ugly situation in there. And with an alternative character, you can resolve that problem. The Olympic Committee are intending to use the font in caps only in many situations as well. So the moment you want to set caps only, you of course want to increase the letter spacing, again to improve legibility, but also the word spacing. So we've built an OpenType feature that automatically increases the letter spacing when all caps setting is selected in Illustrator or in InDesign. So again, the designer doesn't have to interfere, doesn't have to think about that. And numerals, quite important. Generally, all our fonts that we do will always have two sets of numerals. Tabular numerals for setting nice columns, or like in this instance, quite important where you have a rolling clock, say on the TV. You don't want the numbers, to move around on the screen, obviously. And you have proportional numerals to go into flowing text. Again, accessible via OpenType feature. And this is what it now looks like, and I guess it's going to start communication starting very soon, with the Rio Olympics starting to take momentum. Yes, that was actually quite easy. It only took about 8 months to do this project. Now, the whole Rio project was a very emotional thing from a type design project. It is emotional, obviously it's for people in Rio. It's a very emotional thing. It's the first time the Olympics come to Rio. It's a great thing, and the font, and the logo kind of reflect the vitality and the spirit of the people, and they're very happy about that. So a lot of the effort was put into designing, into the expression. But once you start working for big corporate clients, expression is actually the last thing that you need to consider. I've put it up here as requirements, process, and expression. First of all, you need to know what you're actually designing for before you can design. And you also need to know how you're designing it before you're designing it. So don't go away when you get a corporate project. Don't go away, pull out your pencil all excited and start drawing letter forms just 5 weeks later to find out that the stuff actually doesn't work and that it is way beyond what the client intends and needs it for. So think about the requirements. For example, what kind of media is it being used on? Today, the reality is a typeface has to work in all media. Print, web, apps, mobile devices, whatever you can think of, it has to work. That instantly limits what you can do. Instantly. Technologically, also from a design point of view. Languages. The days that you could just do one language are truly over. This is the minimum list for a corporate client that you have to consider. You know, I would say Latin, Greek, and Cyrillic is the bare minimum. But when you start talking about a global client, this is the list of writing system that you need to think of and that you need to make your client aware of. Let's look at Chinese, for example. Chinese, you have to deal with the Chinese government. If you want the Chinese font that you're developing to be distributed with mobile devices or an operating system or just publicly distributed, you have to comply to this standard. This standard makes hardened type designers cry. You will cry. This standard requires you to design 27,500 characters, of which 8,000 no one can read, because they're either archaic form or academic forms, or just forms the government has made up without anyone knowing. It contains both traditional and simplified Chinese. But of course, the traditional forms of Chinese are mainland Chinese forms, which means that the Taiwanese and the Hong Kongese and the Singaporeans ignore it. They can read it, but they don't want to. So you have, for that lot, you have to design another 13,000 characters just to satisfy their needs. We're not talking about the Japanese yet, because their lot of Chinese kanji is a different matter altogether. It's just another 8,000 characters, you know. But 27,500 characters. Then, when you've designed that font, you will have to submit it for certification to the Chinese government, to CESI, the China Electronics Standardization Institute. It will cost you $25,000 per font to get certified. If you're a foreign company, it's very likely they're going to reject it straight away, just so you can pay again. This is not about certification to make sure that the product is good. This is about to make money. This is about to milk you. Yeah? Then you may also have to go for dinner with an official at CESI, so you can actually submit your fonts. And usually the dinners will involve gifts and being friendly to each other, that kind of thing. You know. So if anyone ever asks you to do business in China, run away. It's not a good idea. You know. Now, but it's horrible. But anyway, I'll come back to Chinese. And as a matter of fact, they've just updated the standard and added something like another 50 glyphs or something. So any font that will have to come out now, you have to add the extra 50 glyphs. So for HP, for example, which this is, we started designing to the 27,500 characters. Now we have to do 27,550 characters, because otherwise we cannot submit it for certification. Yeah. That's how it goes. They're making up the rules as they go. You know, it could also cost you $10,000 or $35,000. They make up the rules whatever they feel like. Anyway, Also, you need to think about usage, how it is used, not where it's used, but how it is used. Large size, small size, that kind of thing. And let me give you an example here. A few years ago, we designed a typeface for Burberry, and what you see here is a display version of the font, so very, very high contrast. And this can only be used about 24 point and larger. Anything below, those serifs will simply disappear. They will simply suffer, and accordingly, the visual quality will suffer, and accordingly, legibility will suffer. So, in order to alleviate that problem, we created a medium-sized version and a super small-sized version of the font. So the medium-sized version will work down to about 10 point, 8 point, and the super small size version will go down to 4 point. And we did extensive testing on that. So we did print runs, actual offset print runs on it, both black on white and white on black, to see the effects, kind of like of halo, that kind of thing. So we tested it extensively, and this works perfectly. The super small size version also works engraving on clocks and everything, so it works perfectly fine. The medium-sized version can be successfully applied in all digital environments, such as the website and apps, etc. So the serifs are strong enough to hold up. And this is what kind of like the variations of the letter forms look like. So you will see that actually the super small size version has received the largest kind of like distortion from the original. And when you look at them, if you just go back, when you look at them, the very small size version, of course, looks almost like a different typeface. But then compared, if you see it at 6 point, say, and you compare it with the large size version, they look and feel the same. So it's not about making them the same, it's about making them look and feel the same. Right. Let me talk about processes now. So we know the requirements. For HP, for example, we know the requirements. We know they want to use the font in all the medias. We know they want to use the font in all the languages that you can possibly think of, in all the sizes that you can possibly think of. So we have the basic requirements, so we now need to start thinking about the processes. How do we do this most efficiently? Because in the end of the day, I am running a business. I need to show a profit margin at the end. So therefore, I need to think, what are my workflows? It's not just good designing one font after the next, one weight after the next. I need to plan this. I need to plan this as a font family. I need to plan the languages. When do I start working on the different languages? So it's a whole planning strategy, if you want. So first of all, you obviously have to go and do the concepts. You start working, okay, already we're working in mind large size, small size. We're working with different media in mind, and we're doing sketches. When we started this project about 2 years ago, my designers were working in London, and we were working with the agency Siegel and Gale in New York. And for the first couple of days, we were just sending stuff, sketches, back and forth via the internet, and talking via Skype, and trying to kind of like find out, you know, what they really wanted. After about 2 days, we realized that simply didn't work, that process. It was too slow, it wasn't immediate and interactive enough. So basically I told my designer Lucas, here is a business class flight to New York. By the way, your plane goes in 4 hours. Yeah, get your visa now. So he flew out there, and he was in New York working with the agency for 10 days. They created about 25 different versions of the design concept. What you see here is obviously only a very small selection of it. So about 25 versions, and throughout the whole process or sketching part, Lucas at all times always created fonts. They weren't full complete fonts with, you know, all the characters, just a minimal character set, enough for the client to make an informed decision as to what the design looks like and how it behaves. So he made fonts, gave them to the designers, so the designers could straight away apply them in a real-life environment and make judgments, informed judgments, what type design style is appropriate for the whole campaign, for the whole branding. Once the design concept is agreed and everyone is happy and it's tested. By the way, testing, even at concept stage, is an important factor as well. Straight away, even with your concept, you go onto digital devices to make sure it actually works, your ideas work. You may design a little detail that actually has absolutely no relevance in certain environments. So if that is the case, you better not design it. It's a waste of time. So once all that is designed or decided, you go away and you start drawing. So part of it, and the execution, part of it is research into different script systems, for example. Obviously the drawing of all the characters, spacing, kerning. By the way, kerning is usually done by the new people joining us, in the company. It's a little bit like hinting. Kerning is a little bit like hinting. It's kind of like the thing that you have to do, but no one really wants to, because it's so boring. Kerning must be one of the most boring things on the planet. So I'm really glad, when we get interns and new guys, it's like, yeah, you're doing the kerning now for the next 6 months. Yeah, take that. And only if you've done 6 months of kerning, you're hard enough, to stay at Dalton Moore. Anyway, so you're doing all that, and engineering is part of it, hinting, testing, and then beta release. But let me talk a little bit about the whole production process. So what you see here is basically the final design, and when you design typeface, always design with it in mind to draw the extreme weights. Go as extreme as you possibly can, because that allows you to quickly interpolate a whole range of font weights with relatively little effort. Of course, you have to go in and you have to do manual adjustments to make sure the type looks good. But very quickly, you can generate a range of weights in your font family. But even more importantly, it gives you design consistency. It's not like earlier when Ruben, explained in that hot metal typeface, that some designs had round, some sizes had rounder corners, others had square corners, etc., etc. So there was no design consistency across sizes. If you do this way, you have design consistency. That is important. But you also get technical consistency, and that's important as well. When you design like this, your digital points are always going to be in the same space of every character. That is important, because once you start hinting, if you do it consistently across weights, you can actually copy hint code across weights and save yourself weeks of work, which means you're charging the client weeks of work, but you're not doing weeks of work. That's profit margin, that's pub time, that's good. Yeah, you need to think about this. So it's about processes. Think about 5 months into the future, where am I going to end up? That's very important. So always design on the extremes and come back in. Very important, if you can do that. Languages. We have here the Arabic writing system. Now the word up here, it's not even a word, I hope not anyway. But it contains letters from different languages. For example, the second from the right is a Pashto character, so Pashto Central Asia. And the Arabic writing system is actually the second most used writing system after Latin. It's not Chinese. There's more Arabic native users than there's Chinese native users, because obviously, because of the spread of Islam. And but what you can see here straight away is, and again, for US type users, this is important, and it's about requirements. What you can see here straight away, this is going to cause you layout problems. You can see that the Arabic runs much, much taller than the Latin. How do you solve that in your layouts when you have to say, for example, create a Latin with Arabic text next to it? How do you solve this line layout problem? You need to think about that. You need to think about that when you start building your templates, your English templates or your Portuguese templates. You need to think 3 years into the future when the Arab guy starts using your templates as well. Big issues. Interestingly, with the Arabic, once we delivered the Arabic for HP to Siegel and Gale, a week later we get a phone call. Oh, we didn't realize Arabic goes from right to left. Duh. Yeah. And they had a big problem on their hand. How are they going to do their page layouts? Arabic reads from the back. Latin reads from the front. What is the back? What is the front? How do you do that? It was a big problem. It took them weeks to resolve those layout issues. Again, it's about processes. It's about requirements. You need to think into the future. Another big thing is what we have realized, and that was a learning that we did from Nokia. When we did the Nokia fonts originally, we designed a beautiful Kufi style. You know, very geometric, very vertical, very horizontal, perfectly fitting for UI environments. Absolutely spot on, legible. We were very, very pleased with ourselves. It was a great typeface. And then the Persians looked at it. And they said, we're not reading that. This is Arab imperialism. We will not read that. We can read it, but we will not read it. We want Nasdalik. And we said, you can't have Nasdalik because it's virtually impossible to compute. So eventually we had to redesign the Arabic for Nokia into a Nasr style, so much softer, much more calligraphic, so that the Persians and the Pakistani and the Kashmiri and the Afghani now are also happy, so that, and the Arabs are happy too. So we had to find a new compromise style for Arabic. So instantly you design typefaces for those kind of exotic markets, if you want, and instantly you are in geopolitical, social involvements. And you really have to think about that sort of stuff, the cultural impact of what you're doing. Straight away, with the HP project, we actually didn't even consider a Kufi style, so we went straight away for a Nasr style, kind of like, obviously a Nasr style which is a bit restrained, so it's not overly free-flowing, it's a bit restrained, but it has that softness, so that the Persians and the Pakistani are also happy. Now, coming back to Chinese. When you design Chinese to 27,500 characters, one of the big problems you obviously have is file size. Normally, if you build a Chinese font with that many characters, it will weigh in at about 10.5 megabytes. You give 10.5 megabytes of font to an IT guy who actually has to run a website with that. That guy will kill himself because you absolutely destroy his bandwidth. The maximum that people will accept for both internet usage on Chinese and loading onto mobile devices is about 3.5 megabytes. That's absolute maximum. So how do you go about doing this? If you start looking at Chinese fonts or Chinese characters, when you look at them, they look extremely complex. But once you start analyzing the system, you realize that actually Chinese is not that complex. It's just a lot of it. All Chinese characters can be made or designed and drawn with approximately 12 basic calligraphic strokes. Obviously, you need then to create a library of strokes in different sizes and different proportions, depending on where in the character the strokes sit. So you create a library of the strokes. Those strokes then get combined into radical characters being basic characters, you know, for man, tree, that kind of stuff. And the radical characters then get combined to make up full characters like this. So what you're doing is you're recycling elements over and over and over again. You may have about 50,000 elements in the font, but they're all very small sizes, small file sizes. So that's how you get around the problem of the large file sizes in Chinese. That also requires that you have to do some design compromises, particularly in the heavier weights, where you will end up with some areas just becoming a little bit spotty, a little bit blobby. And that's simply, you can't avoid that. It's a fact of life. You have to do it. And quite often nowadays you find that in Chinese, when you do Chinese fonts, you create a version for digital environments, you know, mobile environments, web environments, and a version for print environment, where you actually have properly designed characters for print. So you can, you know, you can use them large and in print without any of those compromises apparent. Excuse me. When you design Chinese, you usually start off with the bold, because the bold is the challenge. Because like in this character, you can see you have so many strokes that you need to fit in to a defined space. So this is where the challenges are, and you need to solve the challenges here. One of the things I've learned doing Chinese fonts is that legibility is completely different to the way we're seeing it. A Chinese person, when they look at the character, first thing they need to recognize is the outline, the outside shape. That has to be absolutely clear. It doesn't matter if occasionally a stroke collapses in the middle or something is unclear in the inside of the character. That doesn't affect legibility so much. It's the outside shape that defines what the word is, where the recognition is. So again, you're doing the bold first. Once you've designed the bold, you will then do the other extreme, the light. And then you can interpolate the regular weight. And again, that's a question of process, it's a question of timing, because obviously if you interpolate, you can cut down a lot of time, 27,500 characters, or 550 now. Right. Throughout the whole process of designing a corporate typeface, you have to make sure that at key stages you get the client to approve it. Absolutely crucial. We have obviously different stages. We have concept stage. We want the client to say, right, I'm happy with the concept, this is it, we love it. You get them to sign that, because if they change their mind afterward, you can charge them. Very important. Then you do a basic character set. You know, for example, at Bruno Maag, we work to an ASCII standard, so that's caps, lowercase, numerals, punctuations, and some other symbols such as currencies, etc., etc. You get them to sign off those character sets. Absolutely crucial, because if you don't do that and you start designing all the other languages and you start designing the accents and you start spacing and kerning and the client changes their mind, you will do another lot of work. Get them to sign off at key stages so that they know what they're getting. It also allows them to test. Testing is extremely important when you work in a corporate environment. And speaking of testing, again, this morning we were talking about different technologies and perception of like whether people understand, whether people understand the requirement, or back in the old days, whether they would understand the quality requirements and had that foresight when they were designing type. What we found is that today, designing type has become extremely complex, not necessarily because of the languages, but because of the different media. And there is no standards as to how fonts are displayed in different media. You can hint the font, but the Mac ignores all the hinting. On Windows, you're going to have clear type, which means you need only vertical hinting for the full pixels. But then every single browser will again display and interpret your hints separately. You haven't got a clue how your font will display on the screen. You don't know how a font will display in an app. You simply don't know. Yet, this is important to understand because the client has expectations. The client will expect that font to perform to perfection in all instances. And you have to make sure the client understands that this is not going to happen. And there is absolutely nothing you can do about that. Because the digital world is Wild West. Everyone does their own thing without giving a shit about anyone else. And you, as a font designer, are going to do all the support for Mozilla, for Chrome, for app developers. You have to tell the client, no, it's not me, it's the app, it's the browser. But you have to do all the testing in-house, and it's costing you. But this is something you have to be aware. So you need to test upfront before you go to the client, and then you have to tell your client, you need to test so you know what you're going to get. You know what the expectations are. Expectation management, extremely important when doing font design for corporate environments. And then everything is happy, the client has tested, they're approving, you do bug fixes, and then again, testing. Because as type designers, and increasingly as graphic designers, we are in this awkward situation because what we do, or what the clients or people see, is visual, is design. But what we actually are is software developers. We are not graphic designers anymore. We are, as font people, we are software developers. We create software. And this is very important. Therefore, you have to do bug fixing, you have to do testing, you have to do version control, you have to do all that sort of stuff because you're dealing with software, not with design. This is important to understand. You're dealing with software. Just imagine you have a corporate client with 100,000 users. That's just within the corporate. That doesn't even include yet all the design agencies, everyone else who's using it. And you messed up one of your fonts. To re-release that font with an update to all those users is an absolutely phenomenal task. To make sure that everyone has the correct version, because it comes down to support. So it's software, it's version control. It's not design, it's software. This is what the HP font looks like now, the font family. We're more or less to completion with the project, except for the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, which is going to last until about next year, spring 2014, roughly. So we're about halfway in. With the three scripture systems, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, we're doing it all together about 55,000 characters, thereabouts, you know. But of course, the Chinese, the CJK, is the one thing that we don't do in-house. We're working with partners in Asia who obviously have to set up and obviously have the experience in building the fonts. However, we are doing the art direction on the typefaces. I've got a guy in Hong Kong, a Chinese designer, who provides guidance in terms of design, what the characters have to look like, but the actual production is done by one of our partners. Few examples of the HP font in use. I'm sure you have already seen it. And it's quite successful, and I say it's starting to kind of like being used quite broadly. Now, expression. Obviously, just before with the HP, there's a lot of expression there in the font as well. But the HP project is all about processes because it's such a huge project. This little project that I'm going to show you now is really all about design. It's for Faena, luxury hotel chain from Argentina. And we were working with Pentagram in London on this little project. They came to us and said, look, we want to create, you know, we're redesigning their logo. The original logo Faena has was an F, where the middle bar is a fleur-de-lis. And Pentagram wanted to kind of like update that a little bit, and they had this idea that there could be this star in the E in the middle, and they wanted us to work with the client to develop the logo and then to create the typeface out of the logo. So we started working on the logo, as you can see on the top left, and at the same time starting to export it into the design idea into a typeface as well. And here it is all about expression, because the requirements were fairly minimal. It had, because it's such a high contrast typeface, we know it works at large sizes. It does have to work in a web environment to a degree. It's not absolutely important, but print was important, because they are a luxury hotel chain. Print is extremely important. So therefore you have much more freedom as to what you can do in terms of like expression. So small character set just to define the basic design concept. What does it look like? What are the details? And throughout the whole process, and again we're coming back to process, even in the design, sketching, printing, double checking, looking at the design again and again and again. And you can see here quite detailed hand sketches. And increasingly I'm encouraging my designers to not always just work on the screen, but occasionally pick up your pencil, because sometimes you have an idea in your head and you're actually much quicker with the pencil to visualize something, just to do a drawing, you know. And it also gets your eyes away from the screen, which is a good thing too, you know. But just to visualize something and to play, you know, come up with ideas, be more spontaneous. Throughout the process, again, printing out, double checking, finding alternatives as part of the creation. This being a typeface that will be used in hotels for wayfinding, it will be used in brochures, has to of course be legible. So therefore you have to be fairly restrained into what you can do. So the design details, the personality, you build them into small little details. But there are certain characters that you can use, obviously, where you can be really expressive. For example, the ampersand. I personally find the @ symbol really good, you know, to be playful with. However, strangely enough, people always, I don't know whether you've experienced that, but people always want the Arial @ There is a world of ats. Why would you want Arial? Are you that boring? Really? You know? But it also shows you how people are creatures of habit. You know, once they see something, once they get used to something, that's what they want. They don't want anything else. Exactly that. Maybe with a minor variation. A little bit more salt, a little bit more pepper on the food. But do not change my food. Absolutely not. So we were playing with the ampersand and creating variations on that, just to create that little bit of playfulness. And again, printing and double checking. And at this point, it's important to say that also typeface design is not a solitary experience. It is actually something that you have to do in teams. Just imagine, like with the HP project, that's been going on for 2 years. At some point, you simply don't see it anymore. You draw letters day in, day out, you space, you kern, you hint, you don't see it anymore. You need other people to look at your work and to point out what is wrong. And that's what we do here as well. Print out, you hand it to someone else, look it over, see if there's a mistake, you know, and that person will, you know, mark it up with red and come back to you. And this is not about an attack on your character, an attack on your personality. This is about to improve the quality of your work. That's all I'm interested in, the best possible quality. This is what the character set looks like now, the whole project. And this is a bit of kind of like type in action. At this point, I'd like to say as well that serif fonts, in my opinion, in branding, are vastly underused. For some reason, certainly in England and in Germany as well, for some reason, designers seem to think to be modern, you have to use Helvetica. Now Helvetica is the curse of my life. Why would you want to choose Helvetica? It's not even modern Helvetica. Helvetica is based on Accidents Grotesque, which was designed in the Victorian days, 1899, thereabouts. Queen Victoria, that is not modern. That's like when the steam engine happened, you know. Now, if you have to go for a sans serif and a grotesque font, use Universe. That is modern, you know, but not Helvetica. Right, and use serif fonts as well, because I'm so bored with designing sans serif fonts. It's so boring, you know. Unbelievable, you know, and again, as designers, you know, broaden your horizon, you know, because the world is beautiful out there. And if you look at this typeface here for Faina, it's a classicistic, it's a classic typeface. It adheres to classic principles, yet it is contemporary. This is a modern typeface design. And you can even build in little design branding details, personality details, like a historic ligature, ST, for example. Sparingly used, that will become a branding element. You can't do that with Helvetica, I'm afraid. You know, Helvetica is boring, like Arial. You know, if you want to be boring, use Helvetica. You know, absolutely. Now, there is, of course, moments you do want to use a sans serif. You know, we were involved here in the rebranding of the English National Ballet, and traditionally, ballet is always represented with serif fonts. Quite often is Baskerville, you know, Baskerville and tutus and girls going like that, you know, that kind of thing. And I think the English National Ballet did a very brave thing by going away from that world, from this kind of like soft and very friendly and nice imagery, going into something quite hard, quite gothic, actually, and using a sans serif typeface. And I just love the way they use the photography. They're using Rankin, the photographer. Vivian Westwood, is doing all the costumes and everything. And they're using one of our fonts as well as a sans serif, so it's not Helvetica, which makes me very, very happy. But there is moments, you do want to use a sans serif, but that was a conscious choice. It wasn't just kind of like because that was the first font on your font menu on the Macintosh. It was a conscious, deliberate choice to use a sans serif in order to create a brand that would sit apart from what everyone else doing in the industry. So that is me for today. Thank you very much for listening.